Okay, Albert, tell me what risks are involved when you're buying into a sectional title development versus a freehold, the pros and cons.
Okay, so first off, I think sectional scheme, you need to understand that normally it's a block of flats, right? But it's not necessarily a block of flats. It can also be an estate or a complex where there is a lot of, I almost want to say, freestanding houses, but it's also in a sectional scheme. So what a sectional scheme essentially means is it's one mother earth, one earth number, and you own a portion of that scheme. So if it's a block of flats, it's fairly easy. Unit 1 to 50, you own a portion of that scheme. With the estate or a complex, if it is a sectional scheme, that freestanding property doesn't have its own earth number, right? So all these units has got the same earth number, and they're part of a scheme. So normally there's levies involved, and there's also rules and regulations involved. Okay, so that's the one thing. That obviously gets managed by a body corporate, right? And for that, you need to pay a levy, right? And remember, when you're managing property and a lot of people on the same earth,
it becomes tricky.
You can just imagine. Versus where a freehold, you freehold outside or a freehold in an estate. It can also be in an estate where normally where there's a freehold in an estate, there's what they call a Homeowners Association. Okay. So when you buy into that estate, yes, it's a freehold, you've got your own earth number, but you're buying into what they call I think it's a company section 21 or something to the like. So
you still have to pay a fee.
You have to pay a fee, but then you're part of the trustees. You're buying into that, so you're part of that. You are
your own body corporate.
Basically, yeah. Okay. So you still have a manager that obviously manages the Homeowners Association, or someone that's in control. Also rules and regulations, but it's a bit of a different ball game. Normally your levies will be a little bit less because you still have your own insurance on your property, where with a sectional scheme, the insurance gets covered by the scheme, okay? Especially when it's flats. Right, then with regards to sectional scheme, in my personal opinion, there's a little bit more risk, and a lot of people don't want to be in a sectional scheme or a homeowners association for that matter, because they don't like the rules and regulations. Because in a homeowners association, you might have to use the same kind of building style, more likely.
You can't go paint your house pink.
And the same color scheme. Okay. Correct. So you have to adhere to the aesthetic appeal, and people don't.
And they're quite strict with that, correct?
They're quite strict. So you may, a lot of the schemes, you may not have like a caravan or a boat outside of your house, or things like that. You may not see the air coming from the road, things like that. So risk with regards to sectional scheme or homeowner association, I can give you a very good example of one we recently had. So it's a property that we bought and that we just did minor renovations to, and flipped it again, sold it off again. But there was a dispute with Eskom for the scheme, and then there was a special levy raised. So that's also something that you don't have control over. So let's say, for example, they want to repaint a block of flats. Normally, if the body corporate didn't factor in a reserve amount into the levy, then they will raise a special levy for a special project, normally painting, because it's quite expensive. Then you have to pay that special levy. So, and not everyone, number one, pays the levy, then pay the special levy. So someone needs to cover that cost, and that's where a lot of conflict happens. So where there's a disagreement, and like I said, someone needs to cover that cost. So this property that we purchased, dispute with Eskom. Then there was a special levy raised for 660 Rand a month, and if you then there was a new body corporate appointed, and the body corporate said, but if you sell your property, you have to now pay the special levy 5 years in advance, because that's how long it's going to take to pay off
to recover the debt.
And that's 40,000 Rand. So can you imagine our surprise when we had to sell the property and we had to pay 40,000 Rand in levies? That's cutting directly into our profits. Yeah. So things like that does happen. Obviously, we appointed the attorney to claim back that funds, but there's things like that can happen. It's not something that you could have predicted.
And there's no legal costs involved.
And there's legal costs involved, things like that. So that does happen. So there's a lot of risk in a sectional scheme, or in my opinion, a little bit more risk than on a freehold. Freehold, you can pretty much do what you want according to council rules and regulations. You don't have a levy. You do need to look out sometimes. It does happen, even if it's a freehold in an area where maybe first thing that I always look at is, does all of the houses in the area look the same color, same kind of build style? If so, there is a chance of it having a homeowners association, even though it's not a gated estate. So then there might be a small levy that gets raised, but that's things that you need to ask your
agent.
The agent.
And they will have all.
They don't always know that either, but that they should.
But they should
the owner
have.
should know that.
They should have all the detail.
Correct.
Tell me, why is property not the safest investment?
Look, there's a lot of risk involved in any property, in any investment. So that's why I always say that you must do your own due diligence, you must do your own research, own homework. Don't just believe what you hear and what someone tells you. That's obviously where I come in and where I assess the property and the investment strategy. I think the strategy is a crucial point of your investment journey. And buying property is not, people often come to me and say, Albert, is property still a good investment? I'm like, what type of property? Where do you want to buy?
What is the location, etc.
100%. What sector of the market?
That's a big part as well. What is the price that you're paying for it? Because I always say, you actually make your money on the property that you buy the property, not the day that you sell it. Because if you buy it at a good price and not an overvalued price, then you should be making a return over time. So I think that's also why people tend to believe that, but property is a safe investment, but it's not always the safest investment that people think it is, if the price and all of that valuations is not correct.
Look, and with regards to pricing, so yes, price is the first point of call, I almost want to say, but there's a lot of other factors you need to consider, like what's the rates and taxes, what's the insurance on the property, and again, comes back to the strategy. If you buy in a company, for example, you're most likely going to have business insurance, which is a little bit more expensive than your normal day-to-day insurance if you just buy in your personal capacity and your personal insurance over a residential property that you stay in. So there's a lot of different factors you have to consider. There's transfer cost, bond cost, deposits, all of those things you have to consider. So, and I think that's what we touched on in our previous video. Or in our previous sessions, rather, that there's different costs involved, and you must strategize around. Firstly, get the strategy right, and then we can take it from there. What sector you want to invest in? Is it commercial, industrial, residential? Is it multi-lets? Is it student accommodation? Is it short-term letting like Airbnbs? What exactly are you investing in? And I think that's where you need to go and do the numbers.
Yeah, and you have to do your research at the end of the day as well.
Correct.
Now, I could answer on that. And then, what would you say when you're buying an investment property? Because it's different when you buy an investment property and when you buy property for residence. So what would you say is the biggest risk in terms of, or investment risk when buying property? Or one of the bigger investment risks, would you say? Because there is many, but I mean, what would you say is one of the biggest that pops in your mind now?
Look, there's a lot of risk involved, and that's why I always say it's worthwhile, coming to either myself or going to an agent that's got some market knowledge. You have to look at, if we're just looking at, let's say, for example, residential, you have to look at what is happening in the surrounding areas, what developments are coming up, what future developments are coming up, what's been happening for the past 10, 15, 20 years in that area.
Would you say, sorry to interrupt, but would you say, let's say for instance, you'll see there's a dealership popping up in some places, and you see there's a McDonald's popping up at some place, and you see there's all these retail outlets popping up. And they have done the research, I'm assuming. So by the time that you go buy the property in that segment where all that is already happening, you can almost, not guarantee, but there's definitely going to be development happening going forward, because these guys have huge budgets in terms of doing the research, etc. So I mean, when there's this 2-3 car dealerships going on and there's not a lot of properties around it in terms of commercial or residential, then you know something is coming, correct? Or is it not right to assume that?
I would definitely say so. So that's exactly the point. So if you look at especially retailers, if there's retailers coming up, like a big, I don't want to mention names, but a big retailer, shopping center, outlet, or even a fuel station, they've done their due diligence, they know what's coming, they've done their impact studies, and they've also contributed quite a bit to the infrastructure. So just an example, and now I have to mention the name, but a couple of years ago in the area that we stay in, ShopRite they wanted to open or develop a massive DC, and they had to contribute quite a bit to the infrastructure, the roads, the water, the sewer, the electricity, all of those things, and around that DC now there's an entire commercial development, industrial development. So that's all things that.
And there wasn't anything before that.
There was nothing for years. I mean, there was nothing. It was open field.
Open field. So when that would start popping up, then afterwards you saw the others popping up around it.
And then one can tie in. So what happened a lot, especially in development, so what happens a lot is the urban edge keeps on moving. So urban edge, for those that maybe don't know or understand, so in your I want to say your area where you residential areas where you stay, your dorpies.
Yeah.
So, obviously normally there's like quite a number of, especially in Cape Town, there's quite a number of farms around the areas, and as the population grow, they need to make provision for where do people stay. So they need to make provision for residential development, and then the farms get sold off, the ones closest to the dorpie, I can put it that way. And so the urban edge just continues to move 100%.
More borders.
Correct. So as that happens, if a new developer comes in, they obviously have to contribute to the infrastructure.
Got it.
So that's now with your water supply, your electricity supply, your sewer system.
Because at that stage, the sewer system, water supplies, etc., can be restricted to certain extents as well. The more you go out to the border, or more you move,
more
rural you go, obviously
the less infrastructure
and the more capital deployment needs to happen to try and uplift that whole infrastructure.
Correct. So what happens then is, if you own a piece of land or a pocket of land in that close vicinity, maybe you don't have the infrastructure yet, but because of a big developer coming in, developing a pocket of land, you can then tie into that infrastructure, into the water, into the sewer system. So it's going to cost you less than what it initially cost the bigger developer, if that makes any sense what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think to wrap it up in that sense, I think it comes down to just understanding what's happening in and around the sectors where you buy.
Absolutely.
And it's about running the numbers, but it's also about trying to figure out what is going to come, what is there already, and do your due diligence and your studies, etc., going forward. So if I look at costs, what cost does people misunderstand when it comes to property? What is the commonly misunderstood cost?
So I get this quite often, that people think if they are a first-time buyer, they don't have any transfer cost for some other reason. I don't know why they think that.
Don't you think there's not miscommunication in the market, but it's a misunderstanding of there's no transfer cost, but they maybe think about buying new developments. Then there's no transfer cost, etc. But there's always going to be your transfer duties and things like that. But yeah, so is that one of the costs that you would say that comes to mind when you think when somebody buys a property, that's a misunderstood cost, if I can call it as such?
Yeah, so it's very important to make sure that, look, obviously me being an agent myself, very important when a buyer comes, especially first-time buyers, to make sure that they understand what costs are involved in the transaction. Look, even if it's not a first-time buyer, sometimes they bought the property 20, 30 years ago, they've forgotten about all the costs involved and the process, etc., etc. So you must always remember that. So your transfer cost is based on the purchase amount or the sales amount of the property. Then your bond registration cost is based on the amount that you're going to be bonding. So if you, for example, buy a property of 2 million, but you're only bonding $1 million and you maybe have $1 million cash, the bond registration will only be on the 1 million that you're bonding, right? And then currently, where we are sitting, any property under 1,210,000, there's no transfer duty.
And that also moves up every year depending on SARS legislation, such as other tax benefits and things like that. So they do move that a bit
threshold,
further down,
100%,
so that threshold
that value, that amount,
increases.
correct.
Okay.
But there's still transfer cost on that, because the property still needs to be transferred from one name to another, and that is where the conveyancer comes in. That's what you're going to pay the conveyancer. And also the transfer cost, people always say, yeah, but the attorneys make a lot of money. They do, but the bulk of the transfer cost goes to SARS. So that's the duty. The duty
So when
portion.
you get your invoice from the law firm or from the bond attorneys or the conveyancers, you'll have a look at this cost and you think, geez, they make a lot of money, but actually a lot of that is going to SARS, and that
Correct.
normally has to be paid first.
Yeah.
Also, with regards to, if I can maybe just touch on that, when you, and we'll talk about this maybe in another session, but people are easy to say that they are going to move, that they've heard from somewhere along the line or around the fire chat, as we always says, that you'll just move a property from your personal name to a different entity, whether it's a trust or a business. But people don't realize is that there's going to be cost involved with that. And I think we touched on it before, but we'll go into more depth over time, is that that's a considerate cost that you have to take into consideration if you move the property from your personal estate or from your personal capacity to a trust, or because that also, I mean, then you pay registration fees again, you pay transfer fees again, all of that. Yeah.
Look, there is ways and means around it to a certain extent, but the fact of the matter is, if you move from one entity to another, it's going to cost.
And it's not easy. Just, I mean, sometimes people think it's as easy as just moving my property from myself to my trust. There's cost involved as well.
That's why the structuring is very important from day one.
And that is why, again, referring back to the question, is it's a misunderstanding of the conception that people have in their mind. So, Albert, does the tenant really pay the bond for the owner?
Yes, it depends on where you are. So, in Cape Town, maybe not necessarily. In Joburg, maybe, depending on the strategy again. So I cannot say this enough. So it all depends on the strategy. So if you buy into a sectional scheme, for example, so for those that don't know, a flat, you're buying a flat, you're buying it for 1.4 million. You're not going to return 14,000 rand a month. You're not
going to break even from day one.
No, you're not. So most likely.
Is that a misconception that people have? To think I'm going to buy property, yes. I'm going to buy a flat, I'm going to rent it out, I'm going to make enough money to cover the bond and all the costs, and there we go.
I think if you do get that right in today's market, in Cape Town specifically, it's an anomaly. You're very lucky if you can do that, because remember, with the sectional scheme, there's maybe less maintenance. So you're saving on that because you're paying a levy, and the levy is for the maintenance of the outside of the building, the insurance of the outside of the building, or insurance of the building. But there's other costs involved again. So you're also saving. You don't necessarily need your own private insurance unless you want to insure the inside of the building. So having said that, so you need to factor in your purchase price plus your levy per month. So your tenant may be able to pay the bond or very close to it, cover that cost, but then you have extra expenses like the levy, for example. So that's if you're buying a sectional
scheme. Is that
scheme.
Underestimated in some cases?
What do you mean by that?
Because in terms of buying into a complex, again, use the example buying a flat. Some of these complexes, levies are through the roof, and you end up thinking, it will be about $1,000 or $800, whatever the case, ending up being $2,500. Yeah,
correct, and that can escalate.
And we're not talking about special levies and all of that. We'll maybe get to that in a later part, but that's also something to.
I can definitely elaborate on that one.
Yeah.
So remember, that's also something that you don't have direct control over. So you're buying into a scheme. So you're buying into a sectional scheme. So
and that's, sorry again for interrupting, and that's probably also why a lot of property investors think they don't want to, after buying a few flats or buying a few properties in complexes, they tend to think, you know what, it's not for me. I'll rather buy outside of a complex, because then I'm not entitled to that. I don't have to follow the body corporate rules per se.
Yes, I get that a lot, and that's also a strategy that we follow, is to buy a larger piece of land or a larger property, subdividing that into three semi-detached houses. So then we splitting the risk a little bit. Let's say, for argument's sake, one tenant is vacating, or one property standing vacant, maybe for maintenance reasons or whatever the case may be. At least there's two other tenants still paying the bond. Where if you only have one property, let's say you buy a sectional scheme property, you have got one property, one tenant, even a house for that matter, one tenant. If that one tenant vacates, then you're sitting with a vacancy loss. So you must remember that is how we mitigate the risk at the end of the day. So when we buy a property, when we analyze the property, we look at capital growth, we look at cash flow, and then we also look at obviously the bigger risk involved. If one of our units gets rented out on that bigger property, then that should cover our bond already.
Cover the bond. So
right?
you are diversifying. You're not concentrating on one unit
Correct.
only. You're diversifying, and I think that's a big. You have to basically look at making sure that property does not go vacant. But in a case where there's 3 units and if one goes vacant, you're going to be okay, because at the end of the day, the onus and the responsibility on you as the owner, it's always going to be you that's going to have to pay that bond. So
you're always taking the risk.
You're always taking the risk, and you take full responsibility for that. Whether the tenant is there, whether the tenant is not there, whether there's a vacancy, whether this, whether that, you take full risk with making sure that bond gets paid. You can't rely. You can never rely only on the tenant. That's basically what I want to say. Okay.
Yeah. So look, so if one of your units covers the rent, the bond, then the other 2 can cover. That's cash flow. So that can cover your maintenance, it can cover your insurance, it can cover whatever other expenses you have on that specific property. Obviously, once you start building a portfolio, the one can cover the other, if that makes sense. So maybe there's a bit of a shortfall in this one for a couple of months because of maintenance reasons or whatever, or maybe renovations, because renovation is quite expensive. But at least then you've got 1 or 2 other properties that's covering.
Correct. And there's a definite risk, and I think, and what we're trying to bring across in this episode as well is trying to elaborate on the risks that you face when buying a property, because at the end of the day, it's not always advantages. There's always going to be some sort of risk when you invest into anything. So I think it's good that we're just discussing some of the disadvantages as well, and not only the advantages, and how you can actually mitigate your risk. So yes, there's risk, but how do you mitigate those risks? Can someone still lose money even if the property increases in value? So what I'm trying to say is, so you understand the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So you must remember that, let's say for argument's sake, you're buying a property for, I don't know, 2 million rand.
Okay.
But you want to, let's say you're in Cape Town, you buy a property for 2 million rand.
Because if you're in Joburg for 2 million, you can probably get a mansion.
100%.
50,000 square meter plot or something like that.
Correct. So look, okay, so you're buying a property for 2 million rand, it does increase or it does appreciate. So you do have capital appreciation on the property. Great, no problem. But you're renting that property out.
Okay.
But you're renting it out against the loss. So your bond may be 20,000 rand, you took 100% bond, and you're only recovering 15,000 rand a month.
Okay.
So you're actually losing 5,000 rand a month, even though your capital does appreciate. So that's a cash flow problem that you have. Okay, so you have
which a lot of investors got, obviously.
Correct. So depending on your personal income, depending on how much you can fork out to fund that shortfall that you have every month, depending on why there's a shortfall, maybe your property needs to be renovated at some stage. So to increase to force depreciation, to increase the rental return. So there's a lot of things to consider, a lot of calculations you have to go and make. But the long and the short is, yes, so then you're losing out money every month, even though you can have capital appreciation. So if that capital appreciation in the long run, and that's why investments are long term, especially property. So if you can hold out long enough for your property to increase in capital value long enough,
capital appreciation,
then, and you can offset that against your losses, then great. But a lot of people can't. So they only look at the buying number. Can I afford this right now? I'm maximizing my bond.
And yes, that's also what happened. I mean, that's also what happened. And then let's take an example. Let's say 5 years ago, 5 years ago, COVID happened. Obviously, interest rates comes down. Obviously, now suddenly a bond is more affordable. Everybody jumps on, get a house, get a bond, buy a property. So buy 2 properties if you can. COVID passes, a few, you'd say 2 years along the line, interest rates increases, you sit with the problem. It becomes an affordability issue.
Yeah, so I can tell you what happened in 2020 to 2021, 2022. Interest rates obviously was very low. So there was a lot of first-time buyers entering the market, a lot of tenants that now became purchasers. Looking
at the stats, you could see there's a lot of new entry because you guys have that figures, correct? You guys can see US agents got that figures to see and obviously the market stats is given to us from time to time as well, but you can see how many new entrants into the market, who's first-time buyers, etc., and that obviously spiked up.
Yes. So what happened is a lot of people bought, then 2-3 years later, 2023, 2024, there was a lot of interest rate hikes. Consecutive ones, yes, close to one another. And then and remember, that's only on your bond. Now there's a vehicle payment as well that increases. Then there's you
Your
know,
debt,
your debt increases, your life, you know,
Living
your
expenses,
living
yeah.
expenses. So all of that things that increased in a short period of time with quite a big number. If you earn a salary of 50,000 rand, but
way too much pressure at one stage.
but there's an increase of 10,000 rand almost per month, every other month. Where is that money
where's
coming
going-
from?
going
So
the
then people
funding?
had to sell. So what happened is there was a little bit of a bubble where people bought because they could afford it, but they maximized their bonds. Now a couple of years later, 2-3 years later, so because there was a lot of purchases in the market, they obviously overpaid for properties. Now a year or two later, they needed to sell that same property, and they couldn't get that
What
same
they've
number
initially bought it
or just the same number. So they
And
lost
obviously
out
they
on
don't
their,
want to sell at a loss. That's anyone's thing. You don't want to. There's a saying that goes, losses hurts more than gains feels good. It's in the investment world as well. So it says basically you will feel a loss more than what you will feel a gain in that sense. If you have a 10% loss, you're going to react completely different to a 10% gain. So in this case as well, when you bought a property for XYZ and you only sell it for XY without a Z, then you're going to think, geez, okay, but you want to push. And then the longer that property remains on the market, obviously with all other properties on the market, because there's obviously now a much bigger supply into the market, because the demand has been wrapped up when COVID hit, when interest rates now there's an oversupply. Now there's even more properties on the market. Now you can't get rid of your property for the same price that you wanted to get rid of, and then you sit with a
or you're losing out on your, because remember, on any property like we discussed now, your transfer cost. So you're losing out on transfer cost. So already, let's say your transfer cost and bond cost was 100, 150, 200,000 rand. So now a year, 2 or 3 later, you're expecting to sell your property for more, which maybe you can, maybe you can't. But you're also losing out. Let's say you can sell it for the same number that you bought, for argument's sake, because remember, there's now an oversupply, or let's say oversupply, and now you can't sell your property for what you bought it, or for more. So you're losing out on that transfer cost already. That's without, even if you have to sell it for less, then you're losing out even more.
So you can basically lose value. You can lose value if the property increases in value. It's not to say that the market is going to give you the value that you expected, or that the value that increased. At a certain point in time, the market might be saturated with these vehicles.
And just coming back to your question of earlier and our conversation of earlier about the risk and the area around it. So remember, if you bought, I'm just going to use this example again. If you bought in 2022, it was a good area, it was a good market. People were standing queue to buy that property for that amount and overpaid for properties. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years later, people maybe not standing in a queue for that specific property. Yes, there's been capital appreciation, whatever the case
The
might
only
be.
queue is going to be in the bank for overdraft.
Nothing changed on the property, nothing changed in the area, but the macroeconomics changed.
And I always say this when I sit down with my clients and chat with my clients. There's one thing that comes to mind. There's internal factors and there's external factors. And I always say this, and I've repeated myself so many times with clients when I say this. But on the internal factor side, there's stuff that you can change. There's stuff that you can actually change to make things better. And there's external factors which you can't. The macro environment is something we can't change what's going to happen with the interest rate tomorrow. We can't change what's going to happen with the inflation tomorrow.
So no one's got a crystal ball, eh?
Yeah, correct. And so that's, I think, but yeah, just coming down to basic economics 101, it's supply and demand at the end of the day. If there's oversupply and not enough demand, you're going to be sitting with burnt fingers, and vice versa.
So just to come back, so it's not only about area specific, it's also about the economics.
Yeah. So I think that's a wrap. Albert, thank you very much. Guys, on to the next one.